Well, world leaders and ordinary Ethiopians voiced cautious hope that a breakthrough deal between Ethiopia's government and Tigrayan rebels could signal a permanent end to the brutal conflict in Africa's second most populous country. The agreement, unveiled Wednesday after little over a week of negotiations, is seen as a crucial first step towards ending the bloodshed, but many questions remain about its implementation. It was sealed almost 2 years to the day since the war erupted on the 4th of November 2020 between federal forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, and followed a surge in fierce combat from late August that had alarmed the international community. Now, the two sides agreed to silence their guns in a conflict that has seen many thousands of people killed and millions forced from their homes, with reports of atrocities including massacres and rape committed by all parties. Now, African affairs analyst Achike Chude joins us now to discuss the peace process, challenges and likely gains for Ethiopia and Tigray, and he'll also be looking at how to tackle the massive humanitarian challenges that have been created, especially in Tigray. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Now, I know the agreement itself hasn't been shared, the details of it, but a joint agreement that emphasizes the commitment to respect Ethiopia's sovereignty, territorial integrity and constitution, and of course emphasizes that Ethiopia only has one defense force. Former President Uhuru Kenyatta already said that the devil of this is in the implementation. Now, in your opinion, how likely is this a peace deal, and what's the possibility that it's actually just a temporary pause in hostilities?
Well, they described it as a permanent peace agreement. I don't know how permanent that can be. This is the most critical stage of this peace agreement. The fear of violation, or somebody on one side stepping out of line, and to lead to a renewed rounds of violence is always there. So I think what is happening, but of course, that those who brokered the peace under the aegis of the African Union are not just going to sit by and then just allow, the whole thing to devolve on their own. They are going to sit back, they are going to send people and, forces to ensure that all sides, will respect the agreement. And of course, like you have indicated, we don't know the details of this peace, deal. But it's a good thing that they have gotten to that level. It has taken time. It has taken about 2 years for both sides to get to this situation of actually brokering a deal. So everybody has to be watchful. Again, when you go into negotiation, on the basis of, it's a mutual thing. You're not going in there, it's not a win-win situation. So obviously, like the spokesman of the side opposed to the government, did say that, compromises have to be made, sometimes painful compromises. And even from the details that you enunciated, the fact that, they agreed on an indivisible Ethiopia, I think is a major, gain, in the sense that the war itself was questioning the sovereignty of the Ethiopian state, Ethiopia as a state. And so, and I'm sure that was the basis for any other agreement that they had, subsequently. And so, like I said, it's a critical time. All sides will just have to be, watchful and committed. There have been a lot of, losses, violence on all sides. And of course, the humanitarian, issues too. And I'm sure that if there are people of conscience, they know the implication of that. I remember during the Sudan, crisis. I think it was on social media. The Pope himself had to lie flat, begging both sides, to the conflict, and it was very, very touching. In his infirmity, in his old age, he was able to do that, to get on his knees and to beg them, not for their sake, but for the sake, of the innocent people whose blood is being shed, on a daily basis. So we hope that the both sides in Ethiopia would be human enough to realize that those who suffer this kind of tragedies are not the people who sit in government offices and give instruction to soldiers. It's the ordinary people. You talked about people who are being violated, sexually exploited, and all of that, and then those who lack access to medicine. So their conscience should be speaking to them, should be crying out to them that there has to be a stop to this carnage.
Very well said. Now, those involved in negotiating this peace deal are very hands-on. We understand that a media report actually indicates that both sides will meet within 5 days. And that's, to begin the process of demobilization and disarmament. Yes. That's, on one end. But to the other point where you mentioned losses, but all of the sides are being accused of atrocities, like you rightly said. Based on what you've seen play out in the past, how do you think this element would be addressed?
I think that's going to be, it's going to be a dilemma. Because one of the things that will be on the table when these discussions are taking place is not about punishment. It's about reconciliation. And so when you begin to go along that path of reconciliation, that means you're not talking about being vindictive, you're not talking about holding anybody to account. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I have a sneaky feeling that some of these atrocities that have been committed by both sides, by the way, would be buried under the carpet. And then those who have been violated, those who were killed extrajudicially, those who have been violated sexually, and all that, might end up, and I think that is the sad thing about it, but ultimately at the end of the day, some of them who have committed these atrocities might get away with it. Because in most instances, the decisions to do some of these things are done by the rank and file, but sometimes they are done not without the knowledge of the people in charge, the generals, the top politicians. So to make a claim about bringing them to justice, can only exacerbate this crisis. So I think the expediency of it all is that people are going to sit and say, well, we know about these atrocities, we know what has happened, but for us to be able to move forward, we need to look away. And that is the sad, reality about this, that those who have died unjustly might have died in vain, while trying to achieve the greater objective of bringing the war to an end.
Very unfortunate. And while we're on this, Eritrea, of course, we all know that Eritrean troops were, or are still rather, in northern Ethiopia. However, Eritrea was not directly a part of these talks. Now, how likely do you think it is that Eritrea will respect this agreement and withdraw troops from Ethiopia? Also, given the fact that Eritrea is concerned about the threat of the TPLF across the border on their side.
Yeah, I think the Ethiopian government would have to be, held accountable for what Eritrea does in Ethiopia. They have talked about the sanctity, and sovereignty of, Ethiopian territory. And so when you have a foreign army operating deep within your border, that should be a cause of concern. But we know that they have been allies. Don't also forget that we've had a very serious war of attrition between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Of course, they were part of one unit until, Eritrea broke away. And then you now had this very serious war between both sides. It is the present Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy, that was able to bridge the divide and then, renew relationship with Eritrea. And that is why Eritrea got involved in this war. Fighting on the side of the Ethiopian government. And so, yes, people were a little bit worried, by the fact that Eritrea was not part of this peace deal. But if you had brought Eritrea, as part of the solution to this discussion, for instance, what would you have done with all the other groups within Ethiopia that also took part on behalf of the Ethiopian government? They were not necessarily conventional, military forces, but they were also non-state actors that also took part. Are you going to bring them together? So Ethiopia has to take responsibility because Eritrea or Ethiopia is closely aligned with Eritrea, and Eritrea did what they did during this war on behalf of Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has a duty, to ensure that they rein in Eritrea and that they get them back across the border to Eritrea.
Very well said. Now, for step one, peace deal, has been negotiated. The next step, what we mentioned earlier, that the media report indicated that there would be a meeting within 5 days for the demobilization and disarmament, of the Tigray rebels. Tell us about the further steps that you would like to see so that we know that this is actually going to be something that sticks.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we should be looking at, and I think it is critical, is this issue or this display of triumphalism, by one side. In this case, by Ethiopia or the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. There's a saying that when your enemy is down, you don't try to strike the advantage, to take advantage. He's down, he's down. And so, you know, hours before they were able to hammer out this peace deal, the Ethiopian Prime Minister was talking about a victory that they had achieved or that they were about on the verge of achieving. So he needs to play down on that triumphalism, that, you know, gloating over, you know, what the government of Ethiopia has been able to do in this war. And, you know, he should be the statesman. He won an international award, a Nobel Peace Prize, and people began to question even the prize that was given to him, because shortly after that, Ethiopia devolved into war. He was going to other parts of, you know, the African continent that were troubled and in crisis, and trying to negotiate peace in those places like, you know, South Sudan and the rest. And it was on the basis of this recognition that he was given, you know, that Nobel Peace Prize. So people were a little bit surprised that he could not, you know, they say charity begins at home. What he was able to take abroad, he could not bring it home, you know, in Ethiopia. So he needs, I think, a lot of maturity needs to be shown by all sides, but especially by the government, you know, of Ethiopia. It is the government, you know, of the country, you know, and there is, I mean, the Tigray forces have, you know, acceded to the fact that there is only one indivisible, you know, Ethiopia, and so from that perspective, you know, there should continue to be this rapprochement among all sides. And then, you know, another thing again, they need to begin to restore services, you know, to Tigray and aid. Allow the aid convoys to go through. I know that there was a breakdown in the communication channels and, you know, transportation routes in Ethiopia. They need to restore all of this, because I think there's just about 9% of Tigray's, you know, health facilities that are working now. That is an abysmal situation. 1 out of every, you know, child is facing severe malnutrition. You know, and so there have been so much losses, so they need to begin as quickly as possible. And then another thing that is also important is that in the midst of this war, there have been all kinds of fiery rhetorics on social media and all that, ethnic-based, you know, rhetorics that only fuel the crisis further. So they need to begin to tone down on some of these, you know, rhetorics, and I think that would help in a way.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be watching the situation closely. Like we said, it's a very cautious peace, but at least it's peace for now.
Yeah.
Achike, Chude, thank you so much for this insightful analysis.